If you're new here, make sure you stay with us till the end because today's story is one of the most powerful emotional performances ever witnessed on a talent show stage. It's a story that reminds us that sometimes words are unnecessary, sometimes a single moment can speak louder than 1,000 speeches, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who touches every heart. What happened on that stage in Bulgaria's Got Talent didn't rely on grand speeches or dramatic declarations. It didn't even rely on a song. It relied on presence, honesty, and the kind of silent expression that only a few artists in the world can truly master. This is a story about silence used as a voice, stillness used as movement, and expression used as healing. The audience that night didn't know they were moments away from witnessing something unforgettable. The judges were expecting another performance, perhaps singing, dancing, comedy, or any of the usual talents that fill the show. But standing backstage was a young woman whose life had been shaped by a different language, the language of motion, emotion, and stillness. She had prepared for months, maybe years, for this moment, but she wasn't planning to say a single word. She didn't need to. Her heart was full, her message was clear, and she knew that once she stepped into the light, her silence would speak with more honesty than any script. When her name was called, the audience saw a shy figure walking out onto the stage. There was something incredibly fragile yet strangely powerful about her presence. She didn't rush, she didn't smile nervously, she simply breathed in, looked around, and then looked up as though she was absorbing the entire energy of the arena. The judges exchanged looks. They weren't confused exactly, but they were curious. She didn't seem like someone about to deliver a typical performance. And they were right. She stood at center stage with her hands gently pressed together. Her eyes were full of something unspoken, grief, hope, or maybe a mix of both. But whatever it was, it reached the viewers instantly. There are some performers who need time to build a connection. She needed only her presence. The host backstage felt it. The judges felt it. The thousands of people in the crowd felt it. And even the viewers watching from home could recognize that something rare was about to happen. One of the judges leaned forward and asked the usual question, "What will you be performing for us today?" The young woman simply looked at him, took a breath, and placed her hand on her heart. Then she began her performance without uttering a sound. What she did next can be described as dance, but that word feels too small. It wasn't dance in the traditional sense, not the type people are used to seeing on stages like this. It wasn't about technical steps, choreography, or rhythm. It was the kind of movement that comes from deep inside, like an emotion finding its shape. She moved slowly at first, with gestures so subtle that they forced the audience to lean in. Every shift of her hand, every glance, every turn of her head carried meaning. It felt like she was telling a story, not with words, not even with music, but with the raw language of feeling. The judges didn't speak, they only watched, and as she continued, it seemed like every movement grew in intensity, like a silent storm building inside her. She would raise her arms as if lifting memories from the past. She would fold inward as if protecting a fragile piece of her soul. She would reach outward, as if offering something precious to the crowd. And then, in moments of stillness, she let the silence between gestures do the speaking. It wasn't a silence of emptiness. It was a silence full of weight, meaning, and reflection. At one point, she paused completely. There was no music, no sound, only the sound of breathing from thousands of people holding back emotion. And then she placed her hands over her eyes, and a wave of understanding washed over the audience. Many didn't know her story, but they felt it. They felt the grief. They felt the longing. They felt the courage. This wasn't a performance. It was a conversation between her heart and every heart watching. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A man further back swallowed the emotion building inside him. The judges weren't thinking about scores anymore. They were thinking about the connection they were witnessing. It is rare, incredibly rare, for a performer to break through barriers instantly, especially without speaking. But this young woman did it with sincerity alone. As the performance continued, she began moving more freely, as though breaking out of something that had held her captive. Her gestures became stronger, as if she were gathering strength from the audience itself. And in the final moments, she slowly lowered herself onto the ground, rested her hands beside her, closed her eyes, and expressed absolute vulnerability. The entire stage fell into a spiritual stillness. When the last gesture faded away, she opened her eyes again. There was no applause yet. The audience needed a second to breathe. They needed time to process what they had just experienced. Usually applause fills the studio instantly, but this time the silence lingered, not awkwardly, but reverently. Nobody wanted to break the moment too soon. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with a few claps, hesitant at first, then growing, and finally erupting into a thunderous standing ovation. People were crying, cheering, whispering to the person beside them, trying to put into words what they had just felt, and failing. Because the truth was simple. What she created on that stage couldn't be described easily. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't spectacle. It was humanity in its purest form. The judges stood as well. One of them wiped tears from his eyes. Another smiled softly, touched beyond expression. And when the applause finally settled, one of the judges leaned forward and said something that captured the whole experience. "I don't know your story, but I felt it. Every one of us felt it. And that, to me, is the very definition of talent." The young woman bowed her head. She still didn't speak. She simply pressed her hands together again and offered a humble gesture of thanks. When the judge asked her name again, she whispered softly, but even that short reply was almost unnecessary. She had already told the world who she was, and she hadn't needed a single word to do it. Backstage, the host hugged her, visibly emotional. He told her that she had touched the whole country. And indeed, within hours, her performance spread online, reaching millions of viewers. Social media was flooded with comments from people saying they cried, that they felt seen, that they remembered their own struggles just by watching her, or that they had been reminded of someone they lost. Even those who didn't understand dance found themselves overwhelmed. Silence had become a universal language that night. Many viewers later learned more about her life. She had grown up in an environment where expressing emotions was difficult. Words had failed her repeatedly. She spent much of her childhood feeling misunderstood and invisible. But she found solace in movement, a way to translate every buried feeling into something she could finally express. She had turned her pain into art, her loneliness into connection, and her silence into a voice more powerful than sound. Coming to the show wasn't about winning. It was about sharing the truth she had carried for too long. As judges discussed her performance, they realized that talent doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes talent whispers. Sometimes it appears without fireworks. Sometimes it stands quietly, offering a piece of its soul, and trusts that someone out there will understand. That is what she did. And the world understood. Weeks later, she returned for the semifinals, and the audience was waiting for her with anticipation. This time she walked on stage with slightly more confidence, but still with the same humility that had made people fall in love with her. Her second performance built on the themes of her first one, telling a new chapter of her inner story, one about healing, growth, and rediscovery. Watching her was like reading a diary written with movement. You didn't need translations. You didn't need explanations. You simply felt it. When she reached the finals, many viewers said she didn't need to win because she had already achieved something more important. She made people feel connected. She reminded the world that communication isn't always verbal. Sometimes the most heartfelt messages are expressed through silence. Even though she never said much, her presence lingered with viewers long after the season ended. People talked about how her courage inspired them to express themselves, how her stillness helped them confront emotions they had ignored, and how her quiet voice echoed louder than many performances filled with words and music. Her journey shows that talent doesn't always need volume. It doesn't always need dramatic statements. True talent needs authenticity, and she offered authenticity in its purest form. She gave the world a gift many didn't realize they needed, a moment of sincerity, a moment of connection, a moment of peaceful silence that spoke directly to the heart. And that is why her performance has become one of the most unforgettable moments in the history of Bulgaria's Got Talent. Not because she dazzled with technique, and not because she wowed the crowd with spectacle, but because she reminded us that every human being carries a story, and sometimes the deepest stories are told without a single word. Her journey continues today. She performs in different places, teaches young dancers, and encourages people to express themselves authentically. She shows them that silence is not a weakness, emotion is not a shame, and art doesn't need approval to be meaningful. She inspires them to find their own form of expression, whatever it may be. And as for all of us watching from afar, her performance remains a reminder that the most powerful art is honest art. The kind that doesn't try to impress but tries to connect. The kind that doesn't shout but resonates. The kind that doesn't speak but still says everything. Thank you for staying with us through this emotional journey. If this story moved you even a little, remember that someone somewhere is carrying a silent story too, waiting to be felt. Sometimes all we need to do is listen, not with our ears, but with our hearts. And maybe, just maybe, in someone's silence, we will hear a truth that changes us. If you enjoy stories like this one, make sure to stay with us for the next video. Until then, keep feeling deeply, keep seeing beyond words, and keep believing in the power of expression in all its forms.